Hello everyone, welcome to lecture 2 on biological classification. So in earlier lecture we studied about what actually classification is. So classification is that branch that allow us to classify different organisms which are present in our surroundings on the basis of their similar characteristics. So this classification, the system of classification basically allow us to understand the huge diversity of the world, huge diversity of life which is present, so that we can easily understand, we can easily classify them based on their similar characteristics. So this classification system, so different classification systems have been proposed in the literature. So earlier classification system was mainly based on the observable characters, as we studied in the last lecture. So they were basically classified either as plants or animals. Later on, many attempts have been made further to classify the biological organisms. And now with the advancement in our understanding at the cellular and molecular level, and with our better understanding at the protein level, molecular level of the cell, we can now understand the similarities between the organisms at the genetic level and at the molecular level. So based on even those differences and similarities at such at such levels of organization, we can now classify the organisms into the better system. So any classification system is not uniform. Any classification system is not perfect. With time, with the advancement in our knowledge, with the advancement in the techniques, with the advancement in the tools that are available to understand the any biological organism, the classification system is also getting evolved. Earlier, the classification system were not based on the phylogenetic relationship. They do not reflect any evolutionary history of the organisms. But as we will learn about the newer classification system, we will get to know that the more recent ones highlight the phylogenetic relationship between the organisms as well. So the classification system is not constant, but is also evolving with time and with the improvement in our knowledge. So in the last lecture, we learn about two kingdom classification, where the organisms were classified into plant and animalia. The attempts have been made to classify the organisms based on their habits. And in animal kingdom, the organisms were classified whether they have the red blood or they do not have the red blood. So today we will learn about more advanced systems of classification, that were three kingdom classification, and then the better one, which is the five kingdom classification. So the three kingdom classification was proposed by German biologist and botanist Ernst Haeckel in the late 19th century. So he introduced this classification system in his work titled General Morphology their Organism, that is the General Morphology of Organisms, that was published in 1866. So in this publication, he classified the organisms into the three kingdoms. So earlier there were two kingdoms, now he classified the organisms into three kingdoms, and the basis of classification was the cellular structure. So earlier, the classification was based on the blood cells, whether it was red blood or other color blood, or on the basis of the habitat, or mostly on the basis of the observable characters that are visible to us. But this was an attempt that was made to classify the organism based on their cellular structure. So based on the cellular morphology, or based on the structure of the cells, Ernst Haeckel classified the organisms in three kingdoms. So the three kingdoms that he proposed or he defined in his publication included first Animalia, that is animals; second Plantae, that is plants; third is Protista, that is protist. So till now we were learning only about the plants and animals. So in this, a new kingdom was introduced, that was protist. So, kingdom Animalia or the animals include multicellular organisms. So, this is very important that for every classification system, we should know that who proposed that classification system and what is the main basis for the classification system that they use. So, in this classification system, the main basis of the classification was the cellular structure. So, the animals, based on the cellular morphology or cellular structure, they were classified into three kingdoms: animals, plants, and protists. So, kingdom Animalia included multicellular organisms. So, the organisms that are multicellular with eukaryotic cells. So, there are two types of cells that we should know. The one is a prokaryotic cell and the other one is a eukaryotic cell. So, prokaryotic cells do not have organelles that are bound by membrane. So, they lack membrane-bound organelles. While the eukaryotic cells have the organelles, cell organelles that are surrounded by the membrane. That is, they have membrane-bound organelles. So, this system of classification, in this, the Animalia included the organisms that are multicellular, that is, that are made up of more than one cell and are eukaryotic in nature. Animals were characterized by their, now, besides the cellular morphology, other characteristics were also used to distinguish between the different organisms. So, the other characteristic was animals were characterized by their ability to move and consume other organisms for nutrition. So, basically, mode of nutrition and the ability to move was used here to classify the organisms into the animals. So, this was about the kingdom Animalia. What were the features of kingdom Animalia? That the organisms that were included in this kingdom were multicellular, plus they have a eukaryotic. They are eukaryotic. Animals were characterized by their ability to move. That is, they have the tendency to move from one place to another. Also, they have heterotrophic mode of nutrition as they have the ability to consume other organisms for their nutrition. The next kingdom was the kingdom Plantae, that includes plants. So, this kingdom also includes multicellular organisms with eukaryotic cells. So, in this also, the organisms were multicellular and eukaryotic, which is similar to the kingdom Animalia. However, there was some difference between the kingdom Plantae and Animalia. Unlike kingdom Animalia, plants are not able to move, but they are able to synthesize their own food. So, plants were characterized by their ability to photosynthesize, producing their own food, that is, using the sunlight. So, that was the difference between Animalia and Plantae. Both were eukaryotic, both were multicellular. But there were differences in their ability to produce food. Animals consume the other organisms while plants produce their own food. The next kingdom was the kingdom Protista, that includes the organism protist. Now, this kingdom also includes eukaryotic cells, but these eukaryotic cells are unicellular or very simple multicellular organisms. So, protists were considered a diverse group that did not fit neatly into the categories of animals or plants. And it included various microorganisms like algae and protozoa. However, we see that this three kingdom classification that classify the this three kingdom classification that classify the organisms into the three kingdoms includes all the eukaryotic cells. No prokaryotes were given the place in this three kingdom classification. However, it was a much better way of classifying the organisms as compared to the earlier ones. Therefore, it itself has its own significance as it provides one more kingdom to the scientific group to understand about the different organisms that are present in our environment. So, there are certain limitations to this. As one limitation I mentioned is it includes or it talks only about the eukaryotic cells. No prokaryotic cells were involved into this. So, what was the significance of three kingdom classification? So, Haeckel's three kingdom classification was a significant step forward in organizing the diversity of life. It provides a more structured classification system than the previous ones that primarily classified organisms as plants and animals. So in the earlier system, the organisms were only classified as either plants or animals. So it provides a much better way of classifying the organism, more structured classification system than the previous ones. And therefore, it provides a much better classification system than the previous one. However, as I mentioned, the limitation was that it does not talk anything about the prokaryotes, and therefore prokaryotes were not given any place in this system. The next is a 5-kingdom classification, which is the advanced classification system than the 3-kingdom classification. So the 3-kingdom classification was proposed by the 3-kingdom classification that was proposed by Ernest Haeckel. 5-kingdom classification is now proposed by R.H. Whittaker. So this is also known as Whittaker's 5-kingdom classification. It was proposed by R.H. Whittaker in 1969, and it was a groundbreaking system that aimed to categorize living organisms based on multiple criteria. So it does not use any single criteria for the classification, but uses multiple criteria, and based on those multiple criteria, it aims to classify the different organisms. It provides a more comprehensive understanding of biological diversity, and the main criteria that were used for classification of the organisms included cell structure, body organization, mode of nutrition, reproduction, and phylogenetic relationships. So based on these different modes, or based on these different criteria, organisms were classified into different kingdoms. And the kingdoms defined were Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plant, and Animalia. So 5-kingdom classification is a very well understood classification system. It is broadly used by many communities to understand the diversity of life. And the kingdoms that were defined were Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plant, and Animalia. It is not based on any single criteria, but is based on many different criteria that include cell structure, body organization, mode of nutrition, reproduction, and phylogenetic relationship. We will talk about these criteria one by one, and we will try to understand that how different kingdoms are what is the basis of the difference in different kingdoms at these levels. And in the next subsequent lectures, we will learn about each of these kingdoms in details. So firstly, we will learn about what are the bases of the classification. So the first basis for the classification was the cell wall structure. So based on the cell wall structure, the organisms were classified into Monera and Protista, Fungi, Plant, and Animalia. So Monera includes the organisms that have prokaryotic cells. So basically, we know that the 2-kingdom classification or the 3-kingdom classification, there was no description of the prokaryotic cells in those kingdom of classification. While if we talk about 5-kingdom classification, so the Monera group includes the prokaryotic cells that lacks a true nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. While Protista, Fungi, Plant, and Animalia, these kingdom consist of eukaryotic cells with a well-defined nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So, I'm really sorry, this heading should be the cell structure, right? So, the Monera consists of the prokaryotic cells that lack a membrane-bound organelles, while Protista, Fungi, Plant, and Animalia consist of eukaryotic cells with a well-defined nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. The next is the body organization. So, there is a difference in the body organization of different kingdom. Monera are typically unicellular, though some of them may form colonies that we will learn in the subsequent lectures. The next is a Protista. They vary. They may include both unicellular and multicellular forms. The next is a fungi that includes mostly multicellular forms with some unicellular form like yeast. So body organization mainly describes about the cellularity of the organism and whether they are present in a unicellular form, multicellular form, what is the organization at the body level, whether it's a cellular level, whether the organs are present or tissues are present, like or the organ systems are present. So we see that in Monera, or they are mostly unicellular, typically unicellular, though some may form the colonies. While the Protista may be both unicellular and multicellular forms, fungi are mostly multicellular with some unicellular forms. The unicellular forms are known as yeast, and plantae are multicellular with complex tissues and organs. So this body organization here is of tissue level and organ level. Animalia are also multicellular with specialized tissues and organ systems. So we know that animals also have organ system, and tissues are present in the Animalia, kingdom Animalia, and both plant and Animalia are multicellular with specialized or complex tissue and organ system. The next is the mode of nutrition, that is how these organisms take up their nutrition. So different kingdoms, the organisms in different kingdoms take up their nutrition in different forms. So they may be like heterotrophic or autotrophic, depending on what is the mode of nutrition. Heterotrophic ones are the ones that are not able to synthesize their own food, that are dependent on other organisms for their own food, and autotrophic are the ones that are that basically can synthesize their own food by the process like photosynthesis. So, based on the mode of nutrition, organisms are classified as into different kingdoms. They can be classified into heterotrophic or autotrophic. So, based on their modes of nutrition, Monera can be both heterotrophic or autotrophic, and some are photosynthetic. So some we will learn about monerans in the next lecture, but for now, monerans will include the animals. Sorry, monerans includes the organisms that may be heterotrophic or autotrophic. Some of the monerans are heterotrophic, while some of them are heterotrophic as well. They have the ability. Some have the ability to undergo to form their own food by the process of photosynthesis. The next is Protista. The organisms at the Protista level includes the ones that may be autotrophic or heterotrophic or a combination of both. So some organisms in the Protista are autotrophic, while some are heterotrophic, and some are a combination of both autotrophic and heterotrophic. Fungi includes the organisms like which are heterotrophic, that is, they do not have their ability, that is, they do not have the ability. So we will start with the 5 kingdom classification again. Sorry for the interruption. So the 5 kingdom classification was introduced by R.H. Whittaker. So R.H. Whittaker, so this is also known as R.H. Whittaker's 5 kingdom classification. It was proposed in 1969, and this was a groundbreaking system that aims to classify the organisms based on multiple criteria. So in the earlier classification system, we get to know, or we understand that the earlier classification systems were mainly based on single criteria, either based on the blood color or they were either based on the cellular morphology, etc. But this system of classification that was introduced by R.H. Whittaker is based on multiple criteria, and we will understand these criteria one by one in today's lecture. So this system of classification provides a more comprehensive understanding of the biological diversity, as it tries to include all the organisms with the different cellular morphologies or different modes of reproduction or different body organization into various kingdoms. So it introduces more kingdom, it added more kingdom into the system, and it includes based on multiple criteria, and based on those multiple criteria, the organisms were classified into different kingdoms like Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. So these kingdoms were classified based on various systems or based on various criteria like cell structure, body organization, mode of nutrition, reproduction, and phylogenetic relationship. So, based on the cell structure, on the basis of the cell structure, organisms were classified into Monera, and the other group includes Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. So, Monera includes the organisms that have prokaryotic cells. In earlier system of classification, there was no talk about the prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, as I mentioned, they are the organisms that lacks a true nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. So, Monera includes the organisms that are prokaryotic in nature and that lacks a membrane-bound true nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. The next system or the next group includes the Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia, that contains the eukaryotic cells with a well-defined nucleus and a membrane-bound organelles. So basically it classifies, so this was an attempt that was made to classify the organisms based on their true nucleus and the membrane-bound organelles into prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So the prokaryotic group includes the Monera, while the eukaryotic group include Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. So eukaryotic cells are the organisms that contains a well-defined nucleus. Their organelles, cell organelles, are membrane bound, while in prokaryotic cells, the cell organelles are not membrane bound. So they lack membrane bound organelles. So this was an attempt that was made to include the bacteria as well into the classification system, as the earlier classification system does not give any place to the organisms like bacteria or archaebacteria that are now included in the kingdom Monera. So we will learn about Monera in details in the next class, but for now this was an attempt that gives Monera that gives bacteria a special place into the classification system, into the kingdom Monera. So prokaryotic cells were now given the place into the classification system from this 5 kingdom classification. The next basis was the body organization. So on the basis of the body organization, different organisms were classified into different kingdoms: Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. Body organization, by body organization I mean whether they are unicellular or multicellular, and whether they have some whether they are have tissue, whether they have tissues or organs or have the complete organ system. So in Monera are usually unicellular, though some of them may form colonies, but broadly they are unicellular, that is, they are made up of single cells, and therefore they are usually microscopic and cannot be viewed with the naked eyes, can be viewed with the help of the microscope. The next is the kingdom Protista. They vary, so they may have both unicellular and multicellular forms. The next is kingdom Fungi, which are mostly multicellular. So most of the fungi are multicellular in nature. However, there are some unicellular forms also, which are known as yeast. So yeast are the unicellular forms of the fungi. The next is kingdom Plantae. Kingdom Plantae is multicellular, that is, they are made up of large number of cells with complex tissues. So in this we will have tissue system as well. We will learn about different plant tissues like xylem, phloem, that are made up of composed of cells that are specialized to perform a special function, and they have organs as well, right? So in organ system or tissue system started from the kingdom Plantae, and kingdom Animalia is also multicellular with a specialized tissue or organ system. So in the regard of body organization, both kingdom Plantae and Animalia are multicellular. They have both tissue and organ system, but they have differences in the other modes or the other criteria of classification. So this is why this 5 kingdom classification is well adopted, because it is based on multiple criteria. So even when the 2 kingdoms are showing similarity in any one of the criteria, the other criteria will help us to differentiate between the following kingdoms. The next is based on the mode of nutrition, whether these organisms are able to synthesize their own food or they are dependent on the other organisms for their own food. So based on that, they use different modes of nutrition. So Monera may be heterotrophic or autotrophic. By heterotrophic, I mean that the organisms that are dependent on the other organisms for their food. And autotrophic are the organisms that can synthesize their own food. So mononeurons are mainly heterotrophic, or they might be autotrophic as well, and some of them are photosynthetic. Protista are autotrophic, heterotrophic, or a combination of both. That is, they can synthesize their own food, or they are dependent on others as well for their own food, or they may be a combination. Like there might be some organisms that are both that can switch between the modes of the nutrition. The next is fungi. Fungi are mostly heterotrophic. They obtain the nutrients through absorption after an external digestion. So fungi cannot synthesize their own food. They are heterotrophic and they perform external digestion. That is, firstly, the digestion is performed with the help of the enzymes outside the body of the organism, and the nutrients are then absorbed. So they obtain nutrients through the absorption after external digestion. The kingdom Plantae are autotrophic. Organisms in the kingdom Plantae are autotrophic. That is, they can synthesize their own food with the help of the carbon dioxide and sunlight, and in the presence of sunlight, they can convert carbon dioxide and water into the glucose and oxygen. So they can synthesize their own food by the process of photosynthesis, and they are autotrophic. So the next kingdom, which is the kingdom Animalia, includes the organisms that are heterotrophic and they rely on the ingestion for nutrient absorption. So they are heterotrophic in nature. So the difference between the kingdom Fungi and Animalia is that both of them are heterotrophic, but the way the food is digested is different. In kingdom Fungi, the food is digested externally. So there is an external digestion of food, while in the kingdom Animalia, the food is digested internally. It is ingested and then the nutrients are absorbed. While in this, the absorption is the digestion is external and then the nutrients are being absorbed by the organisms for their utilization. So this is the difference. So based on these differences, the organisms are put into the different kingdoms. So here we see that in the earlier way of the body organization, both kingdom Plantae and Animalia were multicellular and have the complex tissue and organ system of organization. Body organization, while there is a difference in their mode of nutrition. In the case of modes of nutrition, the kingdom Plantae are autotrophic, producing food through photosynthesis, while the kingdom Animalia, they are heterotrophic and they rely on the ingestion for the process of nutrient absorption. So the difference between the kingdom Fungi and kingdom Animalia is that the mode of digestion. So in the kingdom Fungi, the mode of digestion is external digestion, while in the kingdom Animalia, the mode of digestion is ingestion. That is, food is digested internally by the organisms and then the nutrient is being absorbed. While in case of kingdom Fungi, the food is digested externally with the help of enzymes and then they obtain nutrients through the process of absorption, right? So the next mode is the mode of reproduction. So in the mode of reproduction, so based on the mode of reproduction, organisms are classified again into the different kingdom. And so different organisms in the different kingdom have different modes of reproduction. We will understand these one by one. So in mononeurons mostly reproduce through asexual reproduction. They mostly have the asexual mode of reproduction and they reproduce through the process of binary fission or budding, while some may exhibit sexual reproduction as well. So in binary fission, one cell is divided into the two cells by the process of cell division, and in budding, there is an outgrowth that happens on the organism, and then this outgrowth, which is known as the bud, deattaches and grow itself as a new organism, giving rise to a new organism. So the mononeurons mostly reproduce by the process of asexual reproduction, that is through the binary fission or budding. However, in some cases, they exhibit sexual reproduction as well.
The next is protist. Protists reproduce both asexually and sexually. So both asexual and sexual reproduction, that includes the binary fission and multiple fission, happens in protist, and they give rise to the new organisms. The next is fungi. In fungi, the organisms reproduce sexually via spores. So mostly the sexual reproduction happens in the fungi, and they reproduce sexually via spores and asexually through fragmentation or budding. So basically in fungi also, both sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction happens. So in Monera also, asexual reproduction happens through binary fission and budding. Asexual reproduction is more common. In Protista, both asexual and sexual reproduction takes place. In fungi mostly reproduce sexually via spores and asexually through fragmentation or budding. Kingdom Plantae reproduce sexually via seeds, spores, or other structures. We will see the reproduction strategies in these organisms in detail when we will learn about these kingdoms in detail. But for now, Kingdom Plantae reproduce sexually, and this sexual reproduction may happen via the seeds, spores, or other structures. Right? The Kingdom Animalia has also reproduced sexually with diverse reproductive strategies. So, based on mode of reproduction, the organisms were classified into the different kingdoms. The organisms in different kingdoms reproduce differentially. Organisms in Kingdom Monera reproduce through the asexual reproduction through the process of binary fission or budding, while some exhibit the sexual reproduction as well. The Kingdom Protista also undergoes both asexual and sexual reproduction. Kingdom Fungi usually reproduce sexually via spores, and if asexual reproduction happens, it happens through fragmentation or budding. Kingdom Plantae reproduce sexually. The organisms in Kingdom Plantae reproduce sexually via various structures like seeds, spores. Kingdom Animalia also reproduce sexually with diverse reproductive strategies. So with the diverse reproductive strategies, Kingdom Animalia reproduce sexually. The next mode of reproduction is, the next criteria for classification includes the phylogenetic relationship. So, till now, all the classification systems were based on the cellular morphologies or the blood colors, but they do not consider phylogenetic relationship. However, the 5 kingdom classification consider the very important criteria, which is the phylogenetic relationship. So, the phylogenetic relationship is based on the evolutionary relationship among the organisms. So, if by evolutionary relationship, I mean that how two organisms closely share their genes. So, based on their shared ancestry and evolutionary history, how two organisms are similar to each other, based on that, the Whittaker considered the evolutionary relationship between the organisms to group them based on their shared ancestry and the evolutionary history. And the classification aimed to reflect the evolutionary divergence of major organisms group. That is, whether the two organisms are very closely related or how these two organisms are being distant, or how far these two organisms are being related. So this information, how we gather this information is obtained by the study at the genetic and molecular level. So when we know the genetic differences between the two organisms, we can get the idea of how these two organisms are related, whether they are very closely related or whether they are distantly related. So by knowing the genetic similarities, at the genetic level, we can understand that these two organisms are either very closely related or have a distant evolutionary history. So based on that, phylogenetic relationship was also considered, and Whittaker considered this evolutionary relationship among the organisms to classify the organisms into this 5 kingdom system. So this is a very now when we study 5 kingdom classification system, till now we know that this is a very good way to classify the different organisms into the 5 kingdom system. But this is not the end. This classification system is even getting evolved. So now we have 3 domain system. Instead of kingdom, we now have domain. where the organisms are classified into 3 domains and then they are further sub-classified into the different kingdoms. So this classification system will get on evolving based on the different tools and techniques that we are now getting to learn. So this is the summary of how different criteria or characteristics were used to classify the different organisms. So based on the cell type, Monera includes the organisms that are unicellular and prokaryotic. Protista unicellular eukaryotic. Fungi includes multicellular, non-green and eukaryotic organisms. Plantae include multicellular eukaryotic organisms. Animalia includes multicellular eukaryotic organisms. Similarly, the nucleus was absent in Monera while it is present in all Protista, fungi, Plantae and Animalia. The body organization of Monera is cellular level of organization. Even for Protista, we have cellular level of organization. In fungi, we have multicellular level of organization with loose tissues, while in Plantae and Animalia, we have tissue level and organ level of organization. The mode of nutrition is both autotrophic or heterotrophic in Monera. Similarly, in Protista, we have both autotrophic or heterotrophic. In fungi, we have saprophytic, parasitic, sometimes symbiotic relationship with the different organisms for the food. So mostly it is heterotrophic. Kingdom Plantae are autotrophic and Kingdom Animalia are also heterotrophic. That is, they cannot synthesize their own food and are dependent on other organisms for their food. Example of Monera includes the bacteria and blue-green algae. Protista includes Spirogyra and Chlamydomonas. Kingdom Fungi includes Rhizopus, Agaricus, etc. Various mushrooms are included in Kingdom Fungi. Kingdom Plantae includes herbs, shrubs, trees. Kingdom Animalia include fish, frog, crocodile, birds, human beings, chimpanzees, monkeys, apes, etc. So this is how we can say that 5 kingdom classification looks like. Monerans can be considered as very ancestral. They are prokaryotic. They are unicellular. They absorb or photosynthesize motile or non-motile. They absorb the food or they may photosynthesize their own food. They are motile or non-motile and they perform asexual reproduction. While Kingdom Protista, that includes Chlamydomonas or Spirogyras, etc., are eukaryotic. They are unicellular or multicellular. They absorb their food, they ingest or photosynthesize their food. They can perform both. They can undergo both sexual as well as asexual reproduction. The next is the Kingdom Plantae, Kingdom Animalia and Kingdom Fungi. These 3 are the eukaryotic cells but are multicellular. So with the movement as we are moving from top to bottom to top, we are seeing the differences. So earlier the Monerans were prokaryotes, however the ones that are present above the Monerans are all eukaryotes. Now the Protista includes eukaryotic unicellular organisms, while the ones that are present above that are all eukaryotic multicellular organisms. So with the advancement at the level, there is an advancement in the cellular morphologies as well. So in Plantae, they are eukaryotic, they are multicellular, they can photosynthesize their food. They are non-motile, that is, they do not have the ability to move and they can perform sexual reproduction via seeds or spores, etc. In Kingdom Animalia, they are also eukaryotic, they are multicellular. They ingest their food, that is, they have the ability to digest their food inside the organism itself. They are motile, that is, they have the ability to move from one place to another, and they can perform they reproduce through the sexual reproduction. The next is the eukaryotic Kingdom Fungi, that includes organisms like eukaryotics, that are eukaryotic in nature, that are multicellular. They absorb their food. They do not ingest, but they absorb their food after the external digestion. They are usually non-motile and they perform sexual reproduction by the spores. So this was the 5 kingdom classification. So today's class was the basics of 5 kingdom classification. So we'll now see some practice questions that will help us to understand this and help us to revise this concept in detailed way. So which kingdom includes organisms with prokaryotic cells? So options are kingdom Animalia, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, and kingdom Monera. We know that kingdom Monera are prokaryotics, while kingdom Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia are eukaryotic in nature. So therefore, the correct answer is option number D, kingdom Monera. The next question is, in which kingdom would you find multicellular eukaryotic organisms that obtain nutrients through absorption? So this is very important that I was highlighting, that here they have asked the mode of nutrition is through the absorption. So multicellular, kingdom Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia, all are multicellular, all are eukaryotic, but the mode of nutrition of absorption is in the kingdom Fungi. Kingdom Fungi includes the organism that are multicellular, eukaryotic, and obtain their nutrients through the process of absorption. The next question is, the presence of chloroplast is a characteristic feature of which kingdom? We know that chloroplast contain chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is essential for the photosynthesis to happen. And we know that which kingdom, that the organisms of which kingdom perform photosynthesis. So the options are kingdom Animalia, Plantae, Protista, and Monera. We know that kingdom Plantae obtain their food by the process of photosynthesis, for which chlorophyll is required, and chlorophyll is present in the cells, that is the chloroplast. The chloroplast is the characteristic feature of the organisms in the kingdom Plantae. The next question is, which kingdom comprises both unicellular and multicellular organisms with diverse mode of nutrition? So options are Animalia, Plantae, Protista, and Fungi. We know that kingdom Animalia, Plantae, and Fungi includes all the multicellular organisms, while the kingdom Protista includes both unicellular and multicellular organisms with diverse modes of nutrition. That is, they may be heterotrophic or autotrophic in nature. The next question is, members of which kingdom are characterized by a lack of cell wall and the presence of nervous tissue? So we know that the tissue level organization is present in Plantae and Animalia, but in plants cell wall is present, in animals cell wall is absent. So the correct answer for this will be kingdom Animalia, where the tissue level organization is present but the cell wall is absent. So we have to see which characteristic is being particularly used to define a particular kingdom. So that is why 5 kingdom classification is important, because it is based on multiple criteria. So lack of cell wall may be a feature of many kingdoms, but the presence of nervous tissue is a feature of kingdom Animalia. So this is how we have to answer these questions. So which kingdom includes organisms that are primarily decomposers, as I mentioned, saprophytes, and plays a crucial role in the nutrient cycling? So the options include kingdom Animalia, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, and kingdom Protista. So we know that the organisms that are primarily decomposers are present in the kingdom Fungi. The next question is, the kingdom level of classification is below which taxonomic rank? So it is below which taxonomic rank? So phylum, class, order, or family, we know it is the phylum after which the kingdom comes, right? So it is kingdom, division or phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then species, right? So the kingdom is the highest category, we know, below which is the phylum. The next is, organisms in this kingdom are primarily autotrophic, producing their own food by the process of photosynthesis. So we know that the organisms in the kingdom Plantae are autotrophic and they produce their own food by the process of photosynthesis. So the correct answer to this question is kingdom Plantae. The next is, which kingdom includes organisms that often exhibit alteration of generations in their life cycle? So this we will learn in details in the next lectures, but the kingdom Plantae includes the organisms that exhibit alteration of generations in their life cycle, right? The next is, the presence of chitin in the cell wall is a characteristic feature of which organism, of which kingdom? So cell wall is present in kingdom Fungi as well as in kingdom Plantae. but the difference is in the composition. So the cell wall of plant A is made up of cellulose, while the kingdom fungi is made up of chitin. So the correct answer is option C, chitin. So the presence of the cell wall is a characteristic feature of the presence of the cell wall that is made up of chitin is a characteristic feature of the kingdom fungi. The next question is kingdom Monera includes organisms that are primarily characterized by. So we know that monerans are prokaryotic and are unicellular in nature. So option C is the correct answer, that says that kingdom Monera includes organisms that are primarily characterized by unicellular prokaryotic cells. The next question is the most organisms in this kingdom are aquatic and they possess flagella for their movement. So in kingdom Protista, organisms like dinoflagellates and diatoms are present that we will learn in the next lecture. So they are flagellate, they possess flagella, they have the ability to move, and they are usually aquatic. So the correct answer is the option C, Protista. The next is the organisms in this kingdom have a unique cell wall composition containing peptidoglycan. So peptidoglycan cell wall is present in the kingdom Monera. So cell wall is present in kingdom fungi, cell wall is present in kingdom Monera, cell wall is present in kingdom Protista, and cell wall is present in kingdom Plantae. But the composition of the cell wall is different. So the biochemical composition of the cell wall of kingdom Monera is mainly the peptidoglycan, while for the fungi we learn that it is mainly chitin, which is also known as fungal cellulose, and in plants it is the cellulose that makes the cell wall composition. The next question is which kingdom includes organisms that can be both autotrophic or heterotrophic depending on their environmental conditions. So the organisms in the kingdom Protista have the ability to switch their mode of reproduction, as I mentioned earlier also when I was explaining that. So the kingdom that includes the organism that can be both autotrophic or heterotrophic depending on their environmental condition belongs to the kingdom Protista. And the next question is members of which kingdom usually have the radial symmetry. So based on the symmetry also we can classify the organisms into different kingdoms. So organisms in the kingdom Animalia have the radial symmetry, that is their body can be divided into two equal halves when divided radially. Right? So members of this kingdom exhibit radial symmetry. The correct answer is the kingdom Animalia. So with this, this was for today's practice questions. And just for a brief review for the 5 kingdom classification, the 5 kingdom classification is a much better way of classifying the organisms as it is based on multiple criteria like modes of nutrition, cell wall structure, cellular organization, phylogenetic relationship between the organisms, etc. And based on this, the organisms were classified into 5 kingdoms that were monerans, protistans, fungi, plant, and animalia. We will learn about these kingdoms one by one in details, that how these, and that will provide more insight into the facts that how these kingdoms differ from each other and what is the peculiar feature of the organisms that are present, that are the members of these kingdoms. With this, I would like to end today's session. Thank you so much.